Good afternoon, Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, Annastacey. This brief dialogue, as typical, as usual, is being held in my car on the way home from a hard day's psychologizing, being a psychologist and stuff. This brief dialogue, thought I'd take a different route. This is a little something for the listeners out there who prefer the more mystical, unusual style of Enlightenment, non-duality, and so forth. Vaguely aware of a sore throat. Maybe I've talked too much today. Anyway, on with the show. First, let us explore experience as best we can with concepts, realizing that concepts, the definitions of language and so forth, are an approximation or a proxy of what's going on. We don't know if the words that we use to talk about, well, anything, accurately describe anything. But they're what we've got, so we got to use them. So, experience. What's happening? What's going on? Let us take a moment to reflect on the immediacy of what's happening right now in your experience. And I'll use my experience as a guide. Right now I'm driving a car along a highway surrounded by beautiful farmland, lush green fields and trees. There are quite a lot of cars on the road this afternoon. It's that time of day. I'm aware that I'm feeling a little bit tired. My throat is a bit tender. What else? A bit hungry, maybe a bit thirsty, and so on. All these are mental concepts. It feels as though the concepts or the thoughts are referring to something outside of me, separate from me, somewhere over there. Let me give an example, a specific example. The thought, this is just the thought, I am tired, is immediately believed to refer directly to my own body. It's somehow it's not even questioned. As far as the observation is concerned, that thought must relate to me somehow and is an appraisal of my fatigue levels right now. The second component is that there might actually be an experience of fatigue. I'm going to yawn. There we go. A yawn, as if to punctuate this important point. A yawn arose in consciousness. So there are feelings in the body. There are sensations in the body. So the idea is, more broadly, that there is some evidence in the body that the thoughts I'm tired or I'm fatigued are reporting. So then we turn our attention to this thing called the body. That's another concept, another idea. The raw experience, as best I can describe it, is a feeling of lethargy, a wanting to yawn as he yawns again. So that's a sort of feeling around the mouth and the eyes get a bit watery. I'm noticing that my cognitive processing is a little bit sluggish, a little bit slow, not firing on all cylinders. My eyes although I'm okay to drive, I could easily put my head down and take a nap. So there's an idea, or an awareness I should say, that there's some fatigue around the eyes and so forth. So these are the so-called physical sensations of fatigue that apparently validate the general concept of fatigue. And I must ask myself, do these ideas about, for example, the tiredness in my eyes, does that actually refer to my eye? Is that feeling a direct reference point to an object in actuality? Is there actually an eye to which that concept refers? Sounds a bit crazy. Of course, the mind might think there's an eye. But what is my experience of that eye? That would be, I could look in the mirror and say, well, there's a visual representation of an eyeball in the face. There's a sense of motion around what I call the eye socket. So as long as my senses are accurate, I could say, then there really is an eye in my head. But are my senses accurate? Well, now I get a bit stuck. I come down to a level at which it's very difficult to talk about. There are senses, no doubt, in the experience, I mean. But now the question as to whether there's an eye gets fuzzy. How can there be certainty on this? And you can see, dear listener, that if you've been following along with your own example, that this is a philosophical conundrum. I don't actually know, beyond my concepts or my ideas, if there's anything in actuality separate or outside of the concept. So there's an awareness of concept, there's an awareness of sensation. And you'll notice that the key or the commonality is this thing that I keep calling awareness of. The word of is a curiosity. It implies a duality immediately, an observer, in fact, that there is someone there who is aware of something over there. Without going into the whole is there or isn't there a person debate, the awareness of also suggests an uncertainty, because we're not sure if there is in fact a person who is aware of. But anyway, that's a separate sideline issue at the time being. Back to the eye itself. We've come down to the basic concepts of idea, some sensory information, but we can't go further. We cannot go further. So we take it on faith that there is, in fact, an eye there. But here's where it gets a bit funny. The experience of the eye is felt to be somewhere in space. If I just presume for a second that it's not sitting in my face, which is a concept, all that could be said is it's sort of floating in space. Somewhere close-ish, feels close, you could say. But now, this awareness of the feeling of I can I separate the two? Can I separate the feeling of my eyeball, the tiredness, from this thing that I'm calling awareness? You see, I'm presuming there's a duality. I'm presuming there's a person who has something called awareness in order to, well, be aware. But perhaps it's a needless duality. Perhaps I've created, or the mind has created, an artificial step in between the feeling and the person to somehow link them together. The person is aware of the I. Nice and neat, good narrative, makes sense. But we don't know if there is a person, and now I'm casting uncertainty on awareness itself. What could be said in more simplistic terminology is there is the experience of I. Eyeball. I'll say eyeball because the word I might confuse the mind. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about my eyeball. The experience of eyeball. Or if you want to be even more simplistic, there is eyeballing. Eyeballing. Great word. So there is eyeballing. And what is that made of? You could ask. If there's no awareness, because awareness is perhaps a needless duality, what is eyeballing made of? As a we'll call it a substance, to give it a way of talking about it. The only thing that I could say with any certainty, because I'm uncertain if there's actually an object there, the only thing that I'm certain of is awareness itself, or the experience itself. It's made of its own experience. It's very hard to describe that. But we take away person from the equation because we're uncertain about that, and therefore we can take away awareness or awareness of because we've removed the person, and all we're left with is this experiencing happening somewhere, we're not even sure where, without a concept. And because we're not even sure if it's made of something outside of us, outside of awareness, all we can really say is it must be made of its own experience. Some people might say it's made of consciousness itself. And there's a very good reason for that. Let us go now, on that point, to a dream. Now, dreaming is funny in a way, quite remarkable. Let's presume that I've, heaven forbid, fallen asleep at the wheel, and I've gone straight into a dream about driving a car. I'm dreaming that I'm driving. I hope this example doesn't get all confusing. We could also say I've gone home and gone to sleep and I'm having this dream. Let's maybe say that to make it less confusing. I've gone to sleep at night in my bed, dreaming about my eyeball. Now, in the dream, you could say, well, it's obviously not the eyeball itself because you're dreaming. You must be using your imagination to conjure up the image of an eyeball. Now, that's a fair explanation. You could live with that quite comfortably, except we're putting it under the microscope here. To just say conjure up out of your imagination doesn't really explain anything. It just gives a nice and neat little summary for the mind to sort of shut up. But if we think about it, isn't the awareness, the same awareness, still present? Isn't the apparent duality, even in the dream, the individual who's awake, in the dream that is, still there, so to speak, aware of the eyeball, in much the same way as I'm talking about right now. In fact, we know that when we dream, we don't know we dream. We kind of roll with it as if it's reality. But we know when we wake up that it was just a dream. So what was the dream made of? What was the substance of the dream? The answer, if we get rid of the word imagination because that's a bit troublesome, must have been the same substance in a way, the same awareness, the experiencing substance. We could call it consciousness itself. The dream substance is consciousness. Things in your dream are made out of consciousness. The reason I just say consciousness is because it takes away the observer and the awareness, which are dualities or steps within a narrative. Or you could just say it's made of the experience itself, the eyeball itself. And even in the dream, no matter how close we look at this eye and examine it, the dream will cleverly fill in all the component parts of the eyeball as if you're awake. Retina, iris, vitreous, optic nerve, blah blah blah, all that stuff. In exactly the same way as if you were exploring the eyeball when you were awake. Even the fact that you can see the eyeball in your dream and your eyes are closed and there's no light suggests that consciousness itself is self-luminous. It doesn't need an imagined external light source. Consciousness itself illuminates. Isn't that interesting? The experience is self-luminous. So this differentiation we have between dreams and awake, not so clear now, not so obvious anymore when we look at it this way. We know that dreams have a different temporal and spatial sort of feeling or quality to them. And we know that kind of crazy stuff happens in dreams that doesn't happen in waking state. So you could say that the only real difference between the two is the sense of continuity or orderliness and the temporal spatial experience. But besides that, they're made of the same stuff. Dream stuff. I don't know, what's a good word? Dream dust. It's a bit too hippy-dippy maybe. So consciousness itself is the substance and the source of the illumination. If you don't like the word consciousness, it doesn't matter. We could just use the word, just use the concept of it's the experience itself. The experience itself. The experience itself because there is an awareness, getting a bit tricky here, an awareness of it. The experience itself must be aware. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that very well. The experience must be aware. If there's no separate entity, individual, who is aware or who has the awareness, then it's awake. It must be awake to itself. How else would it be known, you could say, if it wasn't awake to itself? If there isn't a person who has awareness, then the experience must be awake to itself. Okay, I'm satisfied with that definition there. So the entire manifestation of the world, the universe, life, is a dream, you could say. It's the same as a dream, as when you're asleep, as when you're awake. There's no difference. You're in the dream. And liberation, enlightenment, you could say, is waking up to that dream, as in realizing the dream likeness. I was going to say dream likeness of reality, but reality is one of those words I'm not a big fan of. It's a word used to suggest a sort of solid external world, which we can't find when we look for it. Anyway, 20 minutes in, I feel that's more or less enough on that particular topic. I hope that was in some way informative and gave the people who prefer the slightly more mystical flavors of enlightenment something to chew on or think about. Thank you for listening. Hope you're well. Comments, as usual, are welcome.